Well, after a year full of praise and accolades, can the young pope add to HBO's current high streak? Let's find out. Hey guys, coming up, the series premiere, the new HBO show, The Young Pope, and I'm not gonna lie, I went into the show basically knowing nothing. I mean, I watched the previews, I knew, that the show was coming on, and I knew that this was a show in the UK, but I had no idea what the show was about. I had no idea really what I was getting myself into, and I was definitely excited for it, though, because like I said in my intro, HBO has been on a high streak lately. I mean, I think ever since the night of, it's just, actually, ever since Game of Thrones Season 6, I think they really have been on this high. They've been making just such quality, prestigious TV, and everyone has been praising them, and they've been getting all these accolades and things like that, and I was really hoping The Young Pope would add to that slew of great shows, and after watching this first episode, I'm not gonna lie, The Young Pope is not as good as some of HBO's recent material, but this still is a very interesting and well put together character study that I'm definitely interested in seeing where we're gonna go from here, because there were definitely some interesting things in this first episode, but definitely it's really different than other things HBO has done, and that's something that I actually do appreciate. But let's just get into this episode because I do want to talk about it overall. I don't have a ton to say. Well, I do have stuff to say about this first episode, but this is, I wouldn't say a simple episode, but I think it's a lot less complex than what the rest of the show is gonna be, so let's just get into it. So we start off, and the first scene is just so fucking weird. We see a baby's crawling around a whole floor of other babies, and newly appointed Pope, Pius the 13th, aka Lenny Bellardo, comes out from under the ground, and he then walks around a hall. He wakes up from his phone, and we realize that this is just a dream, and he puts on his sandals, starts out the day. He hears a radio that keeps cutting out and eventually goes out completely. He puts on his robe and walks outside with his cardinals, and he approaches several different cardinals and nuns who all bow their heads at his presence, immediately showing that he is of superiority to them. And he sits down on his pew, thinks back to seeing a naked girl at a younger age, and that immediately tells us that he has committed a lot of sins within his life, which I really do love the way they do that here. He sits down on his pew, and he looks at a curtain and smiles. He goes out to the podium to give his speech, is met with uproarious applause, and he greets the people of Rome and asks them what they've forgotten and says they have forgotten them. He then tells them he's there for every simple reason, to not forget anyone, and tells them God does not leave anyone behind, which is what he told him when he decided to serve him, and is what he says to them now. He serves God, he serves all of them. He says they have forgotten the women and children who change this world with their love and kindness and their divine disposition to play. He says play is the only authentic need they have to make them feel in harmony with life, to be in harmony with God. They have to be in harmony with light. They don't have a choice, and for this point, he's saying standard things that any pope would say. However, what he says next perfectly shows what kind of character Lenny Bellardo really is. Because in his telling of, what they have forgotten, he says they've also forgotten to masturbate, and to use contraceptives, and to get abortions, and to celebrate gay marriages. All things that are heavily forbidden in the church. And he goes on to talk about many things that they've forgotten within the Vatican. The crowd looks down on him in disgust. It's a pretty funny scene, honestly. I did like the humor in this episode, and he tells them that they've forgotten to be happy. There's only one road that leads to happiness, and that road is called freedom. He says something in Rome, and the Pope goes to him and tells him that he's done with God completely. So at this point, I had no idea what was going on, but Lenny asks what he means. He's done since he just got started with God. He wakes up and we realize this is just a dream. This is a dream of what Lenny is really worried about, and clearly, there's a lot riding on him to deliver this address, and he really didn't do that. So I thought it was a good first scene. I was a little bit upset that it was a dream because it was such a great first scene, but what we get next is definitely not nearly as interesting. But we see he then meets with several men who ask him who he is, and he says that he's a contradiction like God, 1 in 3 and 3 in 1, like Mary, Virgin and Mother, like man, good and evil. He says he is the Pope. He meets with a few of the cardinals and nuns who have prepared him a meal, and he reminds him he doesn't eat much, and all he has for breakfast is a cherry Coke Zero. And he and the man introduce himself as Doman, his Maggiordomo, and Lenny asks if he knows what Doman means, and he says the one who belongs to God, so by transactive property, he belongs to him. And you immediately see really how powerful, how power hungry Lenny really is. I mean, this is a guy who is already wants to be the man in charge of everything and is kind of like the mastermind. And he asks, well, not the mastermind, I'd say, he's not a villain, but he very much has that villain-like menacing presence to him. And he asks how he slept. Lenny says he had an amazing dream that Cardinal Oswald and Cardinal Aguirre were slapping each other, and we realize that the entire beginning was actually a dream. And he then introduces Lenny to Sister Biche, who will be his personal cook, and serve 3 pontiffs to the one who came before him. And when she was young, she was a missionary in India, and luckily speaks very good English. She goes to him, tells him to just tell her what he wants, and she'll prepare it for him, and he realizes how quaint she is, and lets Doman know that friendly relationships are dangerous and lend themselves to ambiguities, misunderstandings, and conflicts, and they always end badly. Former relations, on the other hand, are as clear as spring water. Their rules are caved in stone. There's no risk of being misunderstood, and they last forever, and they need to understand, they need to know he does not appreciate friendly relationships, but is a great admirer of formal ones, and says that when there are formal relationships, there are rights, and where there are rights, the earth order reigns. And Cardinal Gutierrez says and immediately, he's making this young woman cry. I mean, really, you can just tell this guy is a douchebag, really. I mean, I gotta say, for the first 10 or so, 10 to 20 minutes, I really found nothing compelling about Lenny. There was nothing about him. I'm like, why are we supposed to care? This guy's just an asshole. There's really nothing interesting about him, and I didn't really find it funny. I just found it really rude. I mean, think about it. In the first few minutes, he's already denounced himself as this, this power-hungry, god-like figure, and he wants to be treated like he's on top. He doesn't want any sort of friendly relationships. He doesn't have an appetite. I mean, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? But through all of this, they do very much tell you who Lenny is, and once the show actually does start, that's really when it got good for me. So Cardinal Gutierrez says the Cardinal Secretary of State and prefects of the various congregations can't wait to welcome him, and Lenny says they're going to have to wait because first he has to drink his Cherry Coke Zero. So we then meet Cardinal Voilio, I don't really know how you pronounce his name, Voiello, there you go, Voiello, he's on his phone, and Don Tommaso speaks to him in Italian and tells him to confess his sins. Voiello says not to waste his time and that his sins have to do with high finance and diplomacy, and even if he were to confess them, he wouldn't understand a thing. And Tommaso says if that's true, then confess his sins he can understand. Voiello says he's had impure thoughts about the Venus of Willendorf, and Tommaso asks who he is, and Voiello says that he's the Paleolithic statue that the Pope keeps in his library. It's 25,000 years old, and for some reason, he has these sexual thoughts about the statue, which that in itself is very interesting. But Tommaso tries to make sense of what he just told him. He asks what kind of penance he can assign for that, because really, what can you do? I mean, it's a statue, and Voiello says the thing about let him know he's in a hurry. A few cardinals and go outside, and this is when the episode really started to get good. From that scene on, I really started to enjoy this show, I have to say. So, they talk about who truly is the deciding factor in the process of electing the Pope. There's this one dude who feels it's the Holy Spirit that does it, while Cardinal Oswald feels that the Holy Spirit is just another name for Voiello, and that Voiello really is the one that does it all, and that he's kind of just pulling the strings, and because, Lenny's so young, it means they won't live to see another Pope. However, they're not sure if Voiello has made the right decision in his choosing of the Pope. Some even feel that he's kind of the devil, and from the way we've seen Lenny, yeah, he kind of is. I mean, he just has this really creepy, unpleasant demeanor to him, and he doesn't at all feel like something that you would call a pope. However, they feel that because Lenny's such a puppet, he can easily be manipulated, and that is just the masterpiece of Voiello's diplomatic cunning. That the reason that he basically picked him is to manipulate him, and that through manipulation, they can make him into the pope they want him to be. However, since we've seen, Lenny, it's not going to work out that well. However, the rest of the Cardinals feel it's not that simple, since they've forgotten one simple question, that being, what is Spencer going to do now his beloved, detested protege has become pope? And we then see a very brief scene of Cardinal Michael Spencer, who was in the running to be pope, but of course Lenny won over him, and he's in a bathroom, he's holding a razor, and he's on the verge of about to commit suicide. Like, he's ready to slit his wrists, but luckily two of the nuns grab him, or else we wouldn't have James Cromwell on the show, and he sits down, cries out, and It's a very sad scene. And again, we don't know what exactly is going on here, but just through that one scene, I found that to be very compelling. I'm interested in seeing where his story is going to go. So Lenny prays to God in his bed, doesn't understand why he has forsaken him with his infinite silence, and you get the sense that he doesn't fully understand, God and things like that. And Lenny goes to Tommaso, who asks for his sins, and he says he has none to confess. Tommaso asks if he's serious. Lenny says he only has one sin, it's an enormous one, is that his conscience does that accuse him of anything. And Tommaso says a few words in Italian. Lenny leaves the confession window. He goes to smoke, and Tommaso tells him if he always heard confessions like his, he'd be out. And Lenny asks how many confessions he hears in the confession window. Tommaso says the entire Curia, a good number of nuns and priests, as well as several lay employees who work in Vatican City. Lenny then goes to him and asks how old he is, and Tommaso says 61. Lenny asks how his eyesight is, and Tommaso says he doesn't even wear glasses, and asks about his hearing. He says his only problem is his hair. It's not just falling out, it hurts. And Lenny says it's very good, tells him he needs him to do something very important for the embassy of his pontiff. And once again, he's just bullying this guy. There's no reason why he should be treating him like shit. He just is. And that was my problem here, is that Lenny is a character. He's just kind of an asshole, and they really didn't give much of a reason as to why. I know it's the first episode, but come on. I mean, it's not really the most ideal way to introduce your main character by acting like an asshole. And Tommaso says whatever he wishes he will do. Lenny says he'll tell him the confessional, and they go inside, and Lenny explains to him what he wants him to do, and we don't hear what that is, so I guess we're going to find out in future episodes. But this was a good scene, but again, you just get the sense that Lenny's kind of just bullying him, and they don't really give you a reason why, which is basically my main problem with the show so far. So Voyello looks at the statue, he's entranced by it, and he goes to meet with Federico and asks him if he knows how many books have been written about him, and Federico says 17. Voyello says it's actually 18, the last one is going to press next week, and it's got the best title of all that being The Man Behind the Scenes, and Federico agrees, and Voyello says he suggested himself. Federico says it's going to be critical about him since a reporter is the one who wrote it, and Voyello says those kind of stories turn people into legends, and faking and says he can laugh, and we then get this scene where Federico laughs, and Voyello literally tells him not to overdo, like, he tells him when to laugh, and it's a very interesting scene the way that was done, and you definitely get the sense that Voyello, he really is the one behind it all. Lenny wants to be in power, but Voyello, this is the man who's in power, he's the one who kind of controls everything, and Cardinal Gutierrez then comes in. He greets Voyello, who asks about Lenny. Gutierrez says he's at the heliport, and he sent him to let him know he'll be a little late for their meeting. Voyello tells him if he sees him to tell him not to be late, because unlike him, he has a lot to do, and he asks what he's made of him, and Gutierrez tells him how he has very little of an appetite, and Voyello says that's not a good sign. Lenny then sees a helicopter from the distance, and here's where we get to interesting stuff with Lenny. Before, I didn't really care. This part of the show, I'm very interested in, because out comes Sister Mary, who he's shocked to see. He clearly hasn't seen this woman in years, and we then see a flashback of a young Lenny approaching Sister Mary, takes his hand, and asks if she's his mother. She says to only call her Sister Mary, and Lenny agrees. She sees something in his hand that his father gave to him. She says she can give it to her if he likes. She'll hold on to it for him, and Lenny says his father told him he should always keep it with him, and we don't know what it is, but we find a little bit. But back in the present, Sister Mary goes to him, kisses his hand, and says he is her saint, and Lenny says he's no such thing, and yeah, I mean, Lenny is definitely not a saint, but that's definitely very evident just by these first few scenes. Lenny is anything but, and she agrees and asks if he still has the pipe on him. He says always. He gives her a tour of the Vatican, shows her a model of a replica. So I thought it was interesting that he had a pipe in his hand, but he then gives her a tour of the Vatican, shows her a model of a replica of the Lady of Lord that's being restored. He tells her from now on she's going to be living at the exact center of the church, and here's where we get to the interesting stuff, really, with Lenny, because Sister Mary brings up the fact that he doesn't really understand how big of a job this is and what this is really going to do to him, and basically she says she doesn't understand what that means. He says it means that just now the center of the church took a few steps back, and he asks her if she likes the apartment. She says she'll be just fine here, and he says she's only a few feet away from him, and she says on the plane she read this amusing description of Rome, a suburb of Vatican City, and he says it's not exactly true, but it will be, and she goes out on the deck. He joins her. She asks him what's wrong. He says what's not wrong, and tells her north is that way where Venice is, and she says to listen to her, and tells him starting today he has to lead the church of 1 billion people, which is 1/5 of the world's population. Then that will depend on what he says and does, and they will make important decisions, happy or sad, of life or death, in order to obey him in the name of God. And all of this creates a new perspective, an immense one, that his personal aches and his enormous sufferings and his terrible memories must take a back seat to. So everything that he's gone through, he kind of has to move on from. And what I love is that we don't know what these memories are. This definitely gets me interested. What kind of past did Lenny have? What could have made him to be this diabolical and this just disgusting, not disgusting really, but this vile man really? What could have caused him to do that? And she says she knows all his sorrows. She lived through them together with him. She's went over them with her, but now the time has come for him to let his sorrows fade and become distant, irrelevant memories, insignificant, vanquished, destroyed, and overpowered by the terrible responsibility that God has given him. From now on, he's no longer Lenny Belardo, the fatherless, loneless boy. Instead, he is Pope Pius XIII, father and mother of the entire Catholic Church, and basically from here, this is now when Lenny realizes really what he has to do, which you definitely get the sense that Lenny doesn't fully understand what it means to be a pope, how big of a job it's going to be, but through this scene you can tell that, he definitely needs to realize, what this job really means for him to be, because he is the pope and it's not something to mess around with, and that's something I think that Sister Mary's going to do very well. She's going to be the one to keep him in line, and I can't wait to see where that whole thing is going to go. So Voyello meets with Lenny, tells him the Holy Spirit, and welcomes him to the church. He tells him that under his desk on the right, he will find a button, and if he feels an encounter is becoming disagreeable or a waste of time, all he has to do is press it discreetly, and an assistant will swiftly appear with some excuse, liberating him from his engagement, and Lenny asks if he's asking him to lie. Voyello says he will, but he'll have plenty of time and opportunity to repent, and we get a kind of a long scene with Voyello and Lenny, but I think it was reasonably long. You get the sense of who these two really are through this scene, how Voyello wants to be the one in charge, but Lenny really isn't letting him. He says if he agrees, he would like to start with their top priorities. The most urgent of all is their first homily in St. Peter's Square. This is something that he has to deliver, what we saw in that dream he has to deliver, and it's something that Lenny keeps brushing aside. Pretty much anything that Voyello brings up to him, he just isn't interested in, he just kind of wants to put aside and says, okay, we'll deal with it later, But these are really things that Lenny kind of needs to deal with now. I mean, when you're a pope, you need to kind of, attend to these certain duties that you're told to do, and that's something that Lenny's not really doing right now. So again, we can see how Lenny really isn't doing, the best thing. In fact, he even tells Voyello to bring him a cup of coffee. Like, he literally is trying to manipulate Voyello, we can see, and basically he talks about how he'd like to proceed his homily, and Lenny says later, but the one request he does have is having to deal with, the most pressing issue would be his need for a cup of coffee and things like that, but he does want to talk about the delicate role of who his candidate's going to be for the role of assistant, and Lenny says that it should be Sister Mary, and Voyello says that is an admirable and perfectly understandable idea, but tells him, unfortunately, that the Curia has complex mechanisms which might seem like astrophysics, therefore the Holy Father's inevitable lack of experience will lead him to suggest an internal contribution. He realizes how central Mary seems to him and says they could invent a sort of ad hoc role for her, and tells him they don't lack imagination around there, and Lenny says he's exactly right, she's central, explains to him Sister Mary took him into her orphanage when he was only 7 years old, and she raised him and loved him and made him a great Christian, and Voyello says that months, and I thought it was interesting, he said good, but then she corrected him and said great. It just shows how not confident Lenny is when it comes to religion. He's really not very confident about it. He doesn't act like religion is something that he's very good at. It seems like something that he's not very good at. I think that's interesting, the way that kind of vulnerability he has when it comes to religion. He's very insecure about it, and that's something I did find very interesting about this scene. And even though Voyello does bring up Monsignor Gemelli, Lenny still wants Sister Mary. He's not going to take anyone else, and I thought it was definitely interesting the way that was done. So he's going to try to make sure that Sister Mary is his assistant, and he then tells him to stop looking at the Venus of Willendorf in that way, in a very villainous type way, and he then smokes, which Voyello quickly tells him is not allowed, in the Papal Palace, and he asks him who decided that. Voyello says John Pope II, and Lenny says there's a new Pope now, and he can do whatever he wants, which, no, he can't, but Lenny has this, intuition that he can do whatever the fuck he wants, which he kind of can, but he kind of can't as well, and that's something, again, that's very interesting about his character. So he tells him how he's too tied to the past, and Voyello says they said the same thing about him, which that definitely is true. And Lenny says the past is an enormous place with all sorts of things inside, but not so with the present, which is merely a narrow opening with room for only one pair of eyes, that being his. And Voyello walks away, but not before Lenny tells him he will be in charge of politics and finance, theology, appointments, and promotions, and he will take care of worldly matters, which he quickly tells him he's joking about. And I thought that was interesting when we saw that. And he tells him their top priorities are: one, the Radio Vatican signal needs boosting, which, we know that because the radio kept going out, and the Pope wants to see all the gifts the Pope receives have a storage facility fit out for all the gifts he receives. 3, the Vatican must immediately buy back the papal tiara from the Basilica in Washington, D.C., which its predecessors have favored sobriety over traditional imprudently let go. And finally, Sister Mary will also look after him and will oversee all his activities. And despite Voyello telling him he's only 60, he still makes this a thing. He still kind of decides that, look, okay, she's gonna look after you, she's gonna get intel on you, and you can just tell that Lenny wants to be in control of everything, which he kind of can't be. And we then get this really funny scene that very much shows us that Lenny really does not know his way around the palace. Like, he really is not used to this Vatican at all. You can very much tell that he's just kind of moved in there, where he goes to the stairs, he goes into a room with a bunch of tourists, including a little boy who calls out for him, and he runs away in fear. It's a pretty funny scene. I really did like the way that was done. It gives him vulnerability, and I definitely enjoyed that. And he then looks like the statue of the Mother Mary, and he asks Gutierrez what his mother was like. He says that she was an omen who did not scorn wickedness. It had the effect of creating a son full of goodness, which Lenny said he inquired about him, and Lenny thanks him for allowing him to be there without hordes of tourists, which apparently was as easy as hanging a sign that said closed. And Lenny says he never shed his aversion to tourists because they're just passing through, and he says that he was late because he couldn't find his office. And Gutierrez says that he knows he opened the wrong door and found himself face to face with some visitors from their museum, and Lenny asks if he's been inquiring about him too, and Gutierrez says that it's very difficult to keep anything secret in the Vatican. Rumors fly so quickly that sometimes they arrive before even the event has taken place. And Lenny says, what is one to do with gossip, which here in the Vatican is apparently called calumny, and he asks him how long he's been at the Vatican, and Gutierrez says so many he stopped counting. And Lenny says the other day during the conclave, he read an Italian newspaper, and it was an article about this politician who had hidden some compromising files in the gaps between the walls of his house, and Gutierrez says he read about that as well. Lenny says he felt he wouldn't need to hide in the gaps of his house because his mind is a gap, and everything that is hidden from him sooner or later is revealed as if it were being entrusted to him. So you can tell this is a man who's hiding a lot about him, and definitely Lenny wants to, knows that he's not going to be able to keep that inside for that much longer, and I think it's interesting where that's going to go. So Gutierrez says it's a precious skill for leading the church. Lenny says it's not a skill, it is his destiny. It is his destiny to be the Pope. It is his destiny to lead the church, and I think it's interesting the way we saw that. So we then get a very interesting scene where Voyello, where he goes to his home, he takes a drink and asks Federico if he knows why all the good souls of the world rage against power. Obviously, it kind of in a huff after his encounter with Lenny. He did not expect him to be as arrogant and as I don't think he expected for him to be as obedient and as just demanding as demanding as he was. And basically, Voyello asks who Lenny was. He needs to carry out a small investigation discreet, but through his weak spots, his trials, his tribulations, and especially his sins, because the sins they commit in the past are the same ones in the future. So he knows that whatever Lenny did in the past, he's very likely to do again, because this man is like God. He never changes, and Federico says he'll start right. But is the situation the papacy already that serious? And Voyello says not yet, but if it were to become so, they'll be ready, because the powerful may have knowledge, but they don't realize what it takes to be more powerful than everyone else, which takes getting knowledge before anyone else does. And then right after this, we get by far the most compelling scene about Lenny that I'm very interested in seeing where this is going to go, and a very interesting way to end the episode. So to a deck and tells him not to be afraid, and Tommaso says he's violating the secret of the confessional, and Lenny says if it's not if the information is intended for him, the pontiff, and for the survival of their church, and tells him not to disappoint him. And Tommaso tells him he's just a poor, simple priest, and the secret of the confessional is the only respectable thing he has. And Lenny says that may be true today, but think about tomorrow, and tells him the scarlet robes and the rings are in his future, the cardinalship, which is more respectable, and Tommaso asks what happens if someone hears them. Lenny says only God can hear them, and Tommaso says who knows where he is. Lenny says he's by the Big Dipper, and Tommaso asks what his house is like, and Lenny says it's half a duplex and a private swimming pool, and tells him to tell people sins. He tells him the Cardinal Aguirre did an imitation of him today, and everyone laughed, including him, but no one knows, and tells him that everyone's wondering who Sister Mary is to him, and why she's still here, and they're also wondering if he's thinking about his first homily, which are all things that I think we're kind of questioning. Is he really that concerned about it? And he asks himself the same thing all the time. Lenny says, of course he's thinking about it. He's even dreamed about it ever since he was little. He learned to confound people's ideas of what's going on in his head, and he says he's very wise, and Lenny says not only that, but also intransigent, irritable, and vindictive, which that's definitely true. Lenny is definitely very vindictive, and he has a prodigious memory, and now he wants to make his confession there before the house of God, and he tells his God his conscience does not accuse him because he does not believe he is capable of repenting, and therefore he does not believe in him, and doesn't believe he's capable of saving him from himself. And Tommaso asks what he's saying. Lenny tells him straight out that he doesn't believe in God, that everything that he's done, he has done it because he does not believe in God. And he tells him that he was joking, but we can very well tell that he's not. He's just kind of saying this to make Tommaso feel comfortable, to make Tommaso think that he actually is willing to run the church, and that is the way this episode ends. Very interesting stuff overall, but let's just get into this episode and where I think we're going to go from here. So overall, this was definitely not a perfect premiere. I definitely will say that. However, in terms of acting, the acting in the show is definitely pretty perfect, and let's just jump into it. Now, one of the reasons I definitely was very interested in the show is the cast. I think the cast here is pretty great, especially Jude Law as Lenny. Like I said, this is a character that I'm not exactly that happy with. I think this is a character that at times can be very annoying and very demanding and just straight up evil. I mean, this is someone who just loves, I think, to be in charge, and he loves the idea of being a leader. This is something that he has wanted to do all his life, and he can't be, he can't fathom the idea of someone else running things and someone being his superior. He needs to be in charge of everything, but he does have a bit of vulnerability to him. Now that we know that he doesn't believe in God, this is a very compelling arc for where this could go. I mean, where this could go with Lenny is just very interesting, because now we know why he, is so against, all these things that are standard for a pope, because he doesn't feel like he is a pope. I think he, in general, thinks that this is more of a dictatorship. He doesn't really think this as religion. Religion isn't really something that he understands. That's why he says he's only a good Christian, not a great Christian, because he doesn't fully believe in God. And that is something that I'm definitely interested in seeing where he's going to go. I just hope that they make him a little less arrogant and they actually show why he is like this, because this could go really well where we have a very compelling character on our hands, or this could be a Vinyl situation where he's just an asshole all the time, which I don't think Lenny's as bad as, the character from Vinyl. I can't even think of his name right now, but definitely, I think that this has potential to be a very interesting character. Jude Law does a really great job hiding his American accent. Definitely, he was really great in the show. You definitely get that really great, powerful presence from him. He portrays that very well, and I'm very interested in seeing where exactly Lenny's character is going to go. Because right now, we have a very interesting character study. I'm hoping that they keep it where, there's an equal amount of demanding, but also an amount of vulnerability, and I hope that vulnerability overrides the demanding aspect of the show as the show goes on. Now, someone who I was very surprised to see in the show, who I haven't seen in so long, is Diane Keaton as Sister Mary. I mean, when was the last time we had a Diane Keaton performance? I think it was in, like, a Gary Marshall movie, but she is incredible in the show as this character. I mean, this is someone who very much does care about Lenny, who very much is that motherly figure, but doesn't want to be referred to as a mother. She is a mentor. She is Sister Mary in every way possible, and she helps him throughout his career. And like I said, I think she's really going to be the one to steer him in the right direction. She's going to be the one to be, if he has a plan, it's going to be like, whoa, slow your roll here. Think really about what you want to do, and I think that's really what she's going to be like. I'm really interested in seeing where her character's going to go. The relation between these two is already very complex and very interesting. I'm very interested in seeing really what's going to happen with her. Now, Silvio Orlando in the show as Angelo Voiello seems like he's supposed to be the villain, but I really do sympathize with the guy. I mean, this is someone who, like I said, is supposed to be the boss. He's supposed to be in charge of Lenny. He's supposed to be telling him what to do, but instead, Lenny's telling him what to do, and that's something that he's just really not used to at all. and that's something I'm interested in seeing, is he really going to get this dirt on Lenny? Because I think he thinks it's going to work out, but I don't know really what's going to happen there. I think that character could be very interesting to see what's going to happen there. I'm interested in seeing really where Voyello is going to go. We have a very potentially interesting character. What also is obsession with the statue? Why does he constantly have fantasies about it? That's something that we don't fully understand either, and that's something I'm definitely interested in seeing. And then the other characters in the show, the main characters, we didn't really get to meet them yet, so I can't really say much about them. However, James Cromwell, the very brief scene we did see of him, I'm very interested in this guy. What really made him this way? Obviously he was in the running for the election, but he lost to Lenny clearly, and this clearly has definitely corrupted his mind. I think he's going a bit insane, but I'm interested in seeing really where he's going to go, where his entire storyline is going to go with him trying to serve to Lenny, if he's going to put up with what Lenny is doing. I'm not entirely sure, but overall, the cast here is really great. We definitely have a very good cast in our hands. I'm definitely interested in seeing where the show is going to go with them throughout the show, and I hope they utilize their talents as well as, say, a Westworld or a Night Of did. But now we get to my more critical points with the show, which is the directing. Now, the directing here, I really don't have a problem with. I think Paolo Sorrentino is doing a very good job with the directing because it's very different. I mean, this show is extremely different. I really have not seen a show quite like this that deals with religion the way the Young Pope does, because some people could say this show is overshadowed by religion, but in some ways it's kind of condemning it. But I don't think it's either one. I think it's kind of showing all aspects, why people believe in God, why people don't believe in God. And I think it's interesting the way that Paolo Sorrento is definitely directing that. What I was very surprised with is the amount of humor in this show. I did not expect the show to be as funny as it was, but it really is very funny. I mean, you have this Pope here who's doing all the wrong things and saying everything bad that he could possibly do. Anything a Pope could do that's wrong, he most likely has done, and it's very funny to watch. I think he overall did a pretty good job with the directing here. It's very strange and different, and it's also very psychological. I'm interested in seeing really where that's going to go with the directing, because he really did do a great job with it. The writing in the show, on the other hand, I think was a bit messy, definitely, and that's mainly because I think right now, at least, we have a character who is kind of hard to like. I definitely will admit that. Lenny Belardo is not a very likable guy. I mean, most of this first episode, he's, yelling at most of his servants. He's telling them, no, I am the Pope. We're not allowed to have friendly relationships. You're just a formal relationship to me. I'm not going to be friendly. I'm not going to be nice. I'm going to be controlling. I'm going to be an asshole. And that's the vibe I got from Lenny Belardo. Not exactly things that make him a very compelling character, but then the other half of it is this broken man who clearly has been through a lot of shits and just is really struggling with this idea of him being a pope, which I think is just something that he really doesn't fully understand. That whole aspect of the show I'm very interested in getting into, because they definitely did hint at the fact that Lenny does not really understand what being a pope really means. He's doing what he wants to do, but this is not really what he wants to do. And I think we definitely get the sense that this is not how Lenny's acted all his life. He's kind of just recently acted this way. And I don't know if it's because he's starting to lose faith. We don't know why he's starting to lose faith. And that's something, again, that could be very interesting. I'm interested in seeing where that's going to go. Most of the jokes hit very well. I was definitely into it. And I thought the supporting characters, even though I wasn't a huge fan of Lenny, the supporting characters were all very interesting, especially when it came to Voyello, his obsession with the statue, or Spencer, that whole thing, or just the Cardinals in general clearly are not okay with Lenny. Like, they do not really feel like this is someone who should be a pope or who should be in this position. They feel this is someone who really is going to, he's really going to corrupt the Vatican. He's going to make it bad, and all these things he's doing are just things that they're not okay with. And that's something, again, I'm very interested in seeing, is where the writing's really going to go. By far the best thing, though, is the visuals. The visuals on the show are just astounding to look at. I mean, this is a beautiful show to look at. Most times, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of visuals that I don't really understand what's going on. A lot of it, like the whole baby thing, I don't really know what that's about. And there's a lot of visuals that definitely is a very psychological show, and I think the visuals worked very, very well. It keeps you invested. It's beautiful to look at, and I really do. And definitely when it comes to HBO, they definitely have kept up with the visuals. It's something that I definitely really did love. But this really doesn't feel like an HBO show. I definitely will say that this really does not feel like a show that HBO would do. And maybe it's because HBO is not the originator of the show. This was an ITV show in the UK. You can actually watch every episode illegally online, or you can watch it on ITV, but you can also watch it, like, you can torrent it and things like that. So, you know, every episode is available online if you guys want to check it out. And I think it's interesting the way that HBO did that. I don't really think I've seen them really do that a lot, where they pick up a show that isn't an original show. Most of their shows are their shows, but I thought it was interesting that this wasn't an original show from HBO. It's kind of cool to see that, and I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen there. I love the intro, by the way. The intro is very simple, but it tells you everything you need to know, and that's something that I definitely did like about the intro. I thought the music was pretty great. And then the editing here, the editing to this episode was fine. I just felt like a lot of the dream sequences, it definitely did take a while for me to get into the show. Once we got to that scene of all the Cardinals discussing, you know, who Lenny really is and being against him, that's really when I started to get into the show. So overall, guys, I really did enjoy The Unpope overall. I think that this could be a very interesting show for HBO. It could be really good or it could be really bad, but there's so much stuff here that's really interesting. The whole idea of religion and a man who's not into it anymore and was slowly losing his faith, and, you know, what Lenny plans to do as a pope. The fact that he's kind of ignoring things that he really shouldn't be, like, you know, him delivering this homily, which is very important for a pope to do, or him addressing certain people, or just not wanting to get involved. The fact that he's, you know, avoiding these things is something that definitely is going to cause an uproar. You definitely do get that sense, and if they're able to get that intel on Lenny, you know, what has Lenny really been through? What is that past going to be like? Things like that are really keeping me into the show. Even though we have a character that I'm not entirely a fan of, this show is not vinyl in any way. I will definitely say that, because they did keep stuff for us to stay compelled. They kept stuff in for me to really wonder, you know, what is this character really going to be like? Is he really this way, or is he just kind of playing God and trying to make, you know, trying to seem like a better guy than he is, and really just seem like this asshole who knows what he's doing, when in reality he really doesn't know what he's doing. All that stuff I found to be very interesting. So overall, guys, I'm going to give the series premiere of The Unpope a 4.5 out of 5 or an A-. Not a perfect show, but some really interesting stuff going on here. Really great visuals, a really great story overall, and another really potentially very interesting show for HBO that could go in a very interesting route. And it's a show that I don't think everyone's going to love. I definitely will say that. There are definitely going to be people who don't like this show, but it's something different. I appreciate them for tackling something different than they usually do. Like I said, it very much feels like a non-HBO show, and that already is me very compelled to see where the show is going to go. I think the story is very interesting. There are just so many elements that could make the show really great, and in general, I can't wait to see where the show is really headed. So over, guys, I'm going to The Unpope. Let me know what you guys thought of this first episode overall. Loved your thoughts on it. This is going to be on Sundays and Mondays, which I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to work that out. If I'm going to review it on Sundays and Mondays, or if I'll do 2 Sunday episodes. I don't know. Like I said, I can watch every episode already, so I don't know really how I'm going to work that out. We'll have to see. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for the series premiere of the new PBS show Victoria, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.